everybody, this is Superintendent Mark, and today we are continuing our work in learning how to be an effective coach in the network of Undeniable Blessing Methodist churches in Northern California and Nevada. Today, we are going to be focused on overcoming some common obstacles to coaching. When we think about obstacles to coaching, there are a number that one might consider. But just to throw it out, time, that is, there typically isn't enough time to accomplish what you want to, or your coachee doesn't have enough time. The match between the coach and the coachee, how you relate with one another, the availability of resources, and you're likely to think of many, many more obstacles to coaching. As with everything in life, there are so many obstacles that one could be focused on, but it's also super important to remember why you're doing what you're doing in order to push through obstacles. Very often when we are coaching, we find ourselves faced with our own pain, our own struggle. Sometimes it's difficult for us to put on the game face and to approach somebody who may be in desperate need for some support at any particular time, or who is really struggling with learning a new task or a new principle. And we're just tired. We don't want to go through it. But more often than not, it's our coachee that's really struggling. And our coachee may be struggling with so many things, lack of confidence or overconfidence, their own press for time. Most of us that are coaching in the NUB are coaching as pastors, and we take huge level of responsibility and ownership over Jesus' command to go and make disciples, to raise up and develop followers of Jesus. So it's actually our job, whether we call it coaching or disciple making or leadership development. In a huge way, it's all lumped in one bag. But for our coachees, they may have a call to be leading as a pastor, but they're also pressed from all sides. And so are coaches, but coachees are pressed from all sides in so many different ways. Often juggling full-time secular employment while trying to do their best to serve the local church and the leadership of a local pastor. Sometimes that local pastor is you, the coachee or the coach. So there's all kinds of things that are pulling at their time, their level of confidence, etc. But they're just a couple of fun quotes that I think are sometimes helpful when we think about coaching and moving through some difficulties. So I'll just share these with you now. Winston Churchill, I love Winston Churchill. If you're going through hell, keep on going. Great words from my perspective. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, said Jesus, because the Lord is our shepherd. And just a Swedish proverb. My wife is Swedish, so I love all things Swedish because I love my wife. But I love this. Worry gives a small thing a big shadow. So when we're really concerned and we have a life full of anxiety, we often find that our troubles seem to grow larger than they actually should be meriting. But of course, the Bible tells us that when we're going through something difficult, when we're asking, is it worth it to keep on investing our time in people, to remember, I am the Lord your God who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you. Friend, if you're coaching and you're following Jesus, you aren't coaching alone, and it isn't your own strength that's necessary in this. In fact, reliance upon the power of God is critical. And the Apostle Paul says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And actually, Paul, of course, is quoting the Holy Spirit when God spoke to him, struggling with this thorn in his flesh, this difficulty that he was dealing with. And it was in this difficulty, in his weakness, that he discovered Christ was strong. So thanks be to God for knowing that just both psychologically, culturally, but more important, spiritually and biblically, we can really push through some of the difficulties when it comes to the obstacles in coaching. But the most important thing we always need to do is remember why. Why are we doing this? Why are we coaching? It is because Jesus told us to make disciples, but there's so much joy in believing that we can actually play a role in spreading light and in seeing not only souls saved, thanks be to God, but in promoting and developing those who can proclaim the good news of Jesus in effective ways with a head full of biblical knowledge and best practice, a heart on fire for the Lord, and fruitful hands that are able to accomplish his good work. And so when you recognize that your light can be multiplied significantly when you take the time to invest in others, I'm not sure for a Christian that there can be much better motivation. But it's also good just to know you're developing more friends, more relationships, more opportunities to have some influence and significance perhaps in your own life. If these are the things that matter to you, there's no better way to achieve them, to experience them, than in a developed coaching relationship. So let's talk about some of these obstacles. A huge obstacle that people often experience is time. So there's my time, the coachee's time, and trying to find ways just to be careful about how we walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best of the time because the days are evil. Or as I put in the slide, because cue the days are evil. Sorry about the typo. But let me just suggest that the time crunch is real for everybody. Our model of leadership development coaching is very low cost. So really money isn't an obstacle. It's a matter of access to a few resources that are necessary, books, reading, videos, things of that nature. But when it comes to the real resource that's completely limited, in fact, for every human being, no matter who you are, rich or poor, you have 24 hours in a day. That's the resource that you're given. So make the most of it. When it comes to coaching, when my time as a coach is hindered, the best way to approach and overcome a time crunch is very simply to be planning in advance. I strongly recommend that you chart out opportunities and time when you're going to be meeting with your coachee well in advance. And if there are changes, make those changes in advance. We'll talk about it a little bit later with if your coachee isn't quite as organized or desiring to be so organized. But if you are busy, and chances are as a coach, you are already a leader and you're already in the thick of many things. So to take on an additional time demand will require for you to carve it out and to carve it out in advance. Now, the reason that it's important to do that is because the coaching experience isn't just spending an hour a week or an hour a month with an individual, depending on the schedule that you've chosen. It's all the time that goes into preparation leading up to each session, the review of progress, the review of material that your coachee ought to have been exposed to, reading or watching and absorbing the work of your coachee so that you can give actual intelligent feedback and ask questions that are meaningful to the situation. That all also takes time. So the only way to arrange for this is to schedule your time in advance, to make it a specific time chunk that you just set out. In my own personal life, I make sure that when I schedule a coaching engagement, I usually schedule whenever possible 6 months in advance and sometimes longer than that with a coachee. And it usually changes from time to time, but when you have it on the calendar, it helps everything fall into place. Furthermore, I make sure that I schedule in advance of the coaching session, usually the day before for an hour or so, to review and to prepare so that I'm ready for that coaching engagement. I also make sure that if I schedule an hour, for example, for coaching, what I'm really doing is scheduling 2 hours, because after coaching, to be able to follow up with the notes and the progress reports, if you don't do them right away, you won't do them. And if you don't do them, then you are not able to give your coachee the feedback necessary and to communicate with the structures in our network that will help that person move forward toward ordination, for example. So make sure you schedule in advance. Now, regarding your coachee's time, it's very important to be able to make sure that the coachee understands what your time demands are, and to sort through and think with the coachee in advance when you're setting up your agreement about the assignments that you give and the requirements that are necessary for the time involved, that they understand the time commitment. More often than not, when you begin the coaching relationship, there's a lot of excitement and active engagement in all of the assignments. But after a couple of months, it begins to wind down. The coachee understands, oh no, I've bitten off a lot. There's a lot of reading, there's a lot of work. I need to implement a lot of things. So the time crunch becomes more real for the coachee, usually a few months into the coaching relationship. That's when you as a coach will need to be very clear about what the time demands are, help the coachee articulate it. So for example, Frank, you are supposed to be at this point focused on learning New Testament survey. This is what you're focused on. So as you are reading the texts, watching the videos, and preparing your lessons as you teach others important aspects of the history and dimensions of the New Testament, you're going to need to break this out into chunks. You're going to need to implement probably at least 2 hours a week in some time and study. And if you do that, the time we meet next month, likely you're going to be able to have about a third of your current project done. But I'm using this as an example to say if you help your coachee think through how to segment and order the time necessary to complete their task, it will help them process a manageable chunk of time so they can accomplish what they need to do in order to learn what they need to learn in order to be an effective leader in a Christian and church setting. So plan in advance for your own time, and make sure that if you're working with a coachee who's often struggling with their time, and you always will be, this is just a reality, that you help guide them to be clear about how segmented their time must be and the requirement to be very focused on accomplishing those things. If you have trouble working that out, if your own time schedule gets thrown for a loop or their time schedule gets thrown for a loop, just make that part of your coaching session and talk about solutions and how you can work through the time issue. But even that takes time. Well, another common obstacle when it comes to coaching is just the match. What sometimes relationally, it's oil and water. Now, I hope that by and large, we're always able to overcome an oil and water kind of relationship, because that's just part of what it means to be a spiritual leader. You will always be leading in a place where you get along really well with some people and you don't get along so well with other people, but you still need to find a way, if you're a pastor, to pastor them, to lead them, and if you're a coach, to develop them and help them grow. But in our system, we do try to make sure that we have coaches and coachees that are pretty well matched along various dimensions. So we spent a considerable amount of time in our last training session on cross-gender and cross-ethnic or cross-racial coaching relationships, which are biblical, they are practical, and they are necessary in order to grow an increasingly diverse network of leaders in any organization, including the church. So we encourage for their differences to exist between the coach and the coachee. That helps both the coach and coachee learn from one another in ways that wouldn't exist if you were paired or partnered with somebody just like you. So we intentionally have some differences very often. But sometimes there can be real cultural mismatches. And real cultural mismatches can take place, for example, along some time understandings. We just talked about time. So you can have a monochromatic time point of view or a polychromatic time point of view, two major ways of looking at time, depending on where you live in the world and the kind of culture that you have. So monochromatic, very precise, very sequential. And in America and in Western Europe, this is like German engineering. If you say you're going to start at 10 o'clock, you're going to start really at 9:50, 10 minutes till. Early is on time. On time is late. So when you say you're going to be there on time, the whole point, the whole focus, the main focus is of the clock. And so there's a strong cultural tendency toward that, including ending on time, by the way. You say you're going to end in an hour, you better end in an hour. Why? Because in this kind of a culture, people are scheduled very precisely. And to respect that schedule very precisely is how you show respect and how things get done. Polychromatic time tends to view not the clock, but a person as the most important thing. And so if I'm with a group of people at any particular time, or if I see somebody injured along the side of the road, think of Jesus talking about the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan was polychromatic, not monochromatic. The Levite was monochromatic. I don't have the time for this person. I've got to be at my next meeting in the synagogue. So I'm going to walk past the stranded, injured person in the ditch. But the polychromatic time frame, the Samaritan, he comes along and he's got things to do too. He's a businessman, according to Jesus' story. But he sees the need. He sees the person as more important than the next thing on his to-do list. That can wait. When I engage those people at that time, they'll have my full attention. But right now, this person needs my full attention. So being people-oriented versus clock or task-oriented, that can be a real cultural mismatch. And people can get really angry with each other over this kind of thing. You can discuss this with one another and perhaps come to a mutual decision about how that will take place. But it's possible that you might require somebody that has been swimming in your own way of thinking. Time was just an example. There are many other examples we could, if we had time, unpack. But there are also some relational triggers. And I'll just, as we think about a whole lot of the various things that happen when we're in a relationship with anybody, there's a whole lot going on that's kind of under the surface for us. And so you might be coaching somebody who has had a traumatic experience with somebody that talks like you. And that can be a real trigger, an emotional trigger deep beneath their conscious level of thinking. And when they meet with you, they like you, you like them. Professionally, you seem to be getting along really well. But just deep in the well of this person, they might have a harboring resentment against you, not because of you, but because of something that happened in a relationship they had with somebody that you remind them of. And most of this just happens, as I said, well below the conscious level. But consequently, now through therapy and time and all kinds of good relationship building, this can be overcome. Trust can be built over time, even when you have an individual that's triggering you in a way that you just can't explain. It's just kind of, driving you a little bit deep into your own shell, or even bringing out anger, or whatever the case might be. Sometimes, that it's better to find a different coach, or to be coaching a different coachee, and to be able to focus on the real point of coaching, which isn't therapy. The real point of coaching is learning both practical ways to do those things that Jesus calls us to do, and spiritual and intellectual ways to engage the Word of God and best practice. And there isn't really time to do therapy in our sessions. And so, and by the way, that isn't to say if somebody has a trigger against you, they need therapy and you need therapy. The point of that is sometimes it's just better to find a better match, and will help the process move forward. And we have a system in place. So just simply connect with the leadership development coordinator. Right now, that's Brenda Mayen, or the Meg chair. Right now, that's Immaculate Adeshina. And they'll be able to help you have a different match. No harm, no foul. It just happens sometimes. Likewise, there can be just a complete mismatch regarding calendar, for example. Perhaps you work during days and they work during nights, and it's just, it doesn't work out very well. Once I was coaching somebody who is a healthcare worker, and his schedule meant that he literally worked all night, which meant that he kept falling asleep every time we were having our daytime coaching session. I wasn't able to change my time so I could connect with him at 3 a.m. for his lunch break, and he wasn't able to stay awake during our 10 a.m. coaching sessions, and there wasn't much we could do. So we had to hook up with a different coaching strategy. There's lots of things that can lead to a mismatch, but leading to a mismatch doesn't mean ending coaching. It means that you have an opportunity to connect with somebody else who needs coaching. Somebody always does. And better, you can help your coachee discover the person that will best help them move through whatever it is that they need out of the coaching relationship. I'm often mindful of the story in Acts chapter 15 when Paul the apostle and Barnabas, the great encourager, kind of had a disagreement over John Mark. And John Mark had flaked out on Paul and didn't continue with the mission that Paul had and thought John Mark ought to be a part of. And so Barnabas says, hey, you know what, Paul, we're about to go on this other mission, and I'd like to bring John Mark with us. I'm the king of encouragement. We're going to give John Mark another chance, and Mark is just going to grow and learn through this. And Paul was like, no way. Sorry, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to deal with somebody who's flaking out. So I'm going to go with Silas. And so Barnabas went with Mark. Paul went with Silas. They both went their own ways. As the scripture says, there was a sharp disagreement. So they separated from each other. But that was, although it was a disagreement, and although it was clear, in both cases, it led to incredible fruitfulness in different areas. So just because you might have a disagreement and might even need to have a different coaching relationship with somebody else as a result of a mismatch, that doesn't mean that there's been a spiritual failure or professional failure. It means you're giving an opportunity for the right people to be engaged with the other right people for them to accomplish what God has in mind. Something good can come out of every change. But if you are thinking about some of these deep issues regarding trigger or mismatch, just 4 questions that I think are super, super interesting when we think about how we want to go a little bit deeper in our own lives and in our lives with our coachee. So Rich Viodas wrote a great book, The Deeply Formed Life. Christianity Today's top pick for spiritual formation in 2020 or 2021. I can't remember. Really good book. I highly recommend it. And kind of distills a principle that you're already familiar with. That is the iceberg principle. What we see on top, what you feel in your own life, what you experience consciously, is the tip of the iceberg. There's deeper things that are submerged deep within your subconscious, and the things that have formed you, that you build upon, and that you reflexively act out of your history, traumatic experiences, positive experiences, what your kids said to you this morning before you went to work, what your dad told you 20 years ago that made you feel really small or really big. All of these things that are deep down below help shape our current reality, the way others perceive us, the way we perceive others. And that's true for the person that you're coaching. So a lot of these mismatch issues really can be sorted through in a healthy way sometimes if you're willing to take a little bit of time. Again, this is not therapy, but a little bit of time just to go a little bit deeper and kind of get to know each other a little bit more, particularly in terms of a particular response to a particular event or your relationship. So there's 4 questions. What are you mad about? What are you sad about? What are you anxious about? And what are you glad about? These 4 simple questions, and you could ask a million, but I like simplicity. So Rich Viona's 4 questions are really good. What are you mad about? Can really get at some experiences that lead to inner irritation. Nobody in most of our pastor coaching relationships. People don't want to talk about being mad or sad or anxious because these are all, unchristian. Totally not true. If you read the Bible, I read the Bible, I can tell you anger and sadness and anxiety are all over every single page. It isn't that it doesn't exist. How do we deal with it? How do we draw it out? And how do we allow our lives to come under the lordship of Jesus in relationship to all of this, including working with somebody who might be really struggling at a moment with deep sadness or deep anxiety? It's not a failure, it's being human. And often these things can help lead us to growth if we're aware of them. So asking these 4 questions in your coaching relationship, especially if it looks like there might be some kind of a mismatch, you don't want to make too many assumptions. You can really ask. So, what are you sad about right now? It seems like you're a little bit down, and I'm just wondering, what is it that's making you feel down? And allow the person to kind of unpack that and to sort of share what is it that they're sad about, or anxious or glad. We like to focus on the glad, and glad is good, but it isn't the majority of our experience on earth. So use these 4 questions in your coaching relationship, and it can really help overcome a lot of issues of mismatch. So another area where there are some obstacles to overcome is how we relate with one another. And in a huge way, it has a lot to do with that mismatch idea. But sometimes as you're coaching, you'll find a coachee who just thinks he or she knows everything. And they're very overconfident, particularly early in the coaching relationship. This is common. If you remember our conversation about leadership development in the leadership square, very common for D1, discipleship 1. Go back and check out these other teachings and trainings on leadership development in the leadership square. But D1 is when your disciple at the first stage is like, hey, I know Jesus, so I know everything, and all of my experiences are full of great, wonderful things, so I can just handle anything. And that's wonderful. You want that kind of enthusiasm in that call. But on the other hand, you know that they haven't yet experienced anything close to the hardships that are required of the leader. And so they're going to be experiencing some difficulty later on. So especially if you're early in your coaching relationship, don't view overconfidence as a negative. In fact, it's super normal that your coachee will be thinking that they can accomplish more than they're actually equipped to do. So as you think about this, also consider the idea of lack of confidence. This is another super common experience for a new coachee, but more often than not, for a coachee as you begin to move into some of the harder aspects of leading and teaching and developing others and counseling and all the relationship issues that go, and intellectual issues that go along with pastoral leadership. And so there's often a lack of confidence. And sometimes there's just so much emotional, either discontent or in the opposite, but really giddiness, that you need to be able to check your own emotions every time you come into a particular relationship with people. So I just want to suggest that there are a couple of things that you might want to consider as you engage all of these different ideas. So first, regarding kind of the issue of overconfidence, I'd like you to be just thinking about avoiding making some specific assumptions. So often when we are looking at somebody who's overconfident, we're just in our own heart, we're thinking, oh, that person is absolutely, full of himself or full of herself. And I'm not sure I really want to deal with this person. And we begin to develop a negative attitude, or this person just never shows up on time, and I'm not sure I can work with this person. So we have this barrier in our own heart of developing a negative attitude, and begin to tell ourselves a particular story about this individual. But let me suggest just 2 important things you need to always consider. One, always assume change is possible. This is a fundamental Christian optimism. We wouldn't be engaged in life with Jesus if Jesus hadn't changed us. And although I know you might look deep in your life and think, oh, there's a lot that I still need to change, but you also know you're not the same person now that you used to be. So you see change in your own life. Have some optimism about the opportunity for change as you invest in and develop others that you are leading and coaching. Further, learn to kind of create a new narrative. Take an alternative point of view. When we begin to tell ourselves that person is full of himself, or that person is lazy, or that person is just to this or to that, and we begin to create a perspective that almost leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we can begin to just make all kinds of negative assumptions about the person that we're coaching. And by the way, they could be making negative assumptions about you as well. Let me suggest that you should look for disconfirming evidence. So if you don't like this person, they rub you the wrong way, or they seem, too obnoxiously proud, or whatever, get to know a few other people that know this person and engage around and see, does anybody else actually like this person? Does somebody else actually benefit from being in this person's presence? Well, almost always in the case of somebody who's coaching somebody called to be a pastor, that person is already engaged in some effective way, usually in the church. And so I'm willing to bet if you look around long enough, you'll see some people that don't share your pessimistic view of that individual. So do the work of a scientist and use your hypothesis. This person is not liked by anybody because I don't like them. But then do the research. Does John like him? Well, yes, he does. Does Jane like him? Well, yes, she does. So begin to ask yourself, why? And one of the positive things they see in this person, I just can't stand. And as that happens, chances are you'll begin to disconfirm some of your assumptions. You can question your own assumptions and begin to create a new narrative for how you approach an individual. And as you do that, let me just suggest that I like to talk about pastoring as a profession. It's not a profession that we enter into because we want to get rich or to have money, but it is a profession. We have a specific set of standards that pastors are required to engage in as followers of Jesus, and living out our profession is very important. Now, if that's the case, then, if you were to go to an auto mechanic who didn't like you, they'd still work on your car. And you would hope that they would be able to put on their game face, so to speak, and at least do the work well. A physician who might be having a really bad day, might really not like you personally, nonetheless, needs to be able to put aside her particular attitude about her patient in order to care for that patient well. That's what professionals do. So professionals don't look at this interpersonal relationship and think, oh, I don't like it, not going to deal with it. You're a professional leader in the Church of Jesus Christ. You profess Jesus, who says, love your enemies. So if anybody has a professional call to actually treat everybody with respect and give everybody the benefit of the doubt, it would be the Christ following leader. So try to disconfirm your negative attitudes and find ways to approach, at least in a neutral, professional way, a person that you're trying to coach to their benefit. And chances are you'll find that as you have a better attitude toward that person, they will have a better attitude as well in that relationship, and probably begin to grow in ways that you couldn't have imagined seeing when you have a negative attitude. It's also important to recognize that some people really lack confidence. So I talked about that a little bit. And I just want to share a few tips about confidence. Humility is a big virtue for those that are following Jesus Christ. And, braggadocious people just, well, really rub everybody the wrong way, but particularly in our walks with Christ. So if somebody is humble and self-effacing, well, I mean, that's not really a bad thing at all. That's actually, kind of a Christian thing. So that's okay. But sometimes people lack self-confidence to the degree they don't believe they can do things that God has called and equipped them plainly to do. And that can happen for so many different reasons. Usually it's formed actually in childhood. And a narrative or a series of things that they've learned to believe about themselves because of how a parent taught them or a significant other in school, or bad experiences they had in high school or even college can um, really alter how a person views their own capabilities. So let me suggest a couple of things. If you're working with somebody that is growing, clearly from your perspective, has a lot of potential and is probably achieving beyond their perspective, because this is what happens when somebody lacks self-confidence. Let me suggest a couple of things there. First, just telling the person, you're great, is likely not to be helpful. If somebody is expressing their lack of confidence and you kind of brush over that, and just say, oh, don't worry about it. You're really a fantastic person. Um, almost always, what the self-talk for a person who lacks confidence would be is, whatever. They're just saying that because they want me to feel better or they want to manipulate me to do something for them or whatever. But I know I'm no good. I know I can't really do this. So just giving compliments really, it's actually not helpful. The better thing to do is to try to help that person instill within themselves or begin to recognize and be able to see within themselves the strengths that clearly you see in them or can help draw out. And some of the best ways to do that really is to be very specific. So, oh, you're a great person, or you preach really, really well. That's not really going to be heard by somebody who lacks confidence. But you might be able to say something like, wow, I really love the way you used this particular illustration when you talked about how that flower opened up and it was something that allowed you to see how you can open up before the Lord. That really put in my mind the image of what it means to be open before the Lord, and even in a beautiful way. So when you said that, I was deeply. Or I noticed the way that you came alongside of John the other day, and John was really struggling. But what I saw you do is go up to John, you put your hand on John's shoulder, you asked if you could pray for John. I just saw John's eyes light up. It looked to me like you were demonstrating some really good compassion and pastoral care for a person in time of need. So if you can be really specific about what you see, what you observe, then that actually helps build confidence because it's a real thing. Now, another significant way to help instill confidence in somebody is to ask them to do some self-critique. So, you gave this wonderful illustration of a flower open before the Lord, and it really moved me a lot. What were you thinking when you were putting that together? And let the coachee talk about that. I was thinking this, or I was thinking that. And, did you realize what kind of profound impact that kind of thought process is going to have on other people? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but they're hearing you talk about the profound impact they have on you. So that helps them to instill, oh, wow, when I do something like this, it's really making a difference in others. Maybe I can do something valuable. Help them unpack that. And then be willing to ask a question like, so do you see that the way I do as a real positive in your communication skills? And allow them to actually give themselves a compliment. If they can't do it, keep working at it until they're able to identify that as a strength. And for all of us as Christians, by the way, we have strengths, we have weaknesses. When we have strengths, glory to God. But let's own the strength in that God gave us. And that helps to, again, build confidence. Two other things about confidence building that's super helpful, I think. Uh, One is to give a compliment to somebody. Oh, by the way, don't be making stuff up. Make these real compliments about work done well or an attitude well demonstrated. But to, to if you've heard somebody else say something positive about this person, that always goes like a million times farther than if you just say you feel positively about this person. So, for example, man, I was talking to some members of the church the other day, and Jill just pointed out what a marvelous communicator you are, and she's just having a great time listening to how you preach. When you are able to bring somebody else that's had that positive experience with this person into their life, that takes away the, oh, they're just saying that to make me feel good. That's what? There's word on the street. People are talking a positive way about me when they're not talking to me. That can really help profoundly shape somebody's experience. And to heighten that, if there's a person in authority or who is deeply aware of all the hard work that the kind of work your coachee is doing has made a positive statement, then make sure you share that. John, I heard the bishop say the other day that he just loves reading what you write on your blog. I didn't even know he was reading your blog, but you're clearly touching him. So when something like that happens, then that really helps instill confidence. It's good to instill confidence. This isn't um, uh, an exercise in simply building up emotional self-worth regardless of effort at all. This is literally what it means to encourage, to give courage. That's what it means to put in courage, strength against adversity, willingness to take risks. If somebody all their life has been told you shouldn't take risks, play it safe, you're not good at this, you're not good at that, they need encouragement. They need somebody else to help remind them of the power of God at work in and through them. So help build people up and overcome the obstacle of a lack of confidence through instilling some of that courage using the techniques that I just shared. Also, just as we look at some of those initial obstacles that I was sharing about our relationships, I want to talk about two aspects of emotion. Um, when we think about emotion, there's two ways that we need to be aware of. One is that the coachee is over emotional, or maybe way too flat and affect, but either which, the emotion just isn't there. But really, what I want to talk about is your emotion and how you approach things, how you communicate with your coachee. Because again, back to the idea that you are a professional leader, right? You're a professional pastor, and your job, according to Jesus, is to equip the saints for good works for the kingdom and to, as the Apostle Paul said, entrust into competent people what you're learning from the Lord, from the scripture, from the apostles, in order for them to then teach others. In order to do all of this, you need to be clear that it's not about you, it's about your ability to lead others. And this is important. Keep your emotions in check, and wherever possible, be positive regarding the affect that you project. So you've noticed I've smiled a few times throughout this training session. It's an intentional decision. I could be really full of flat affect or even sad. It hasn't been a particularly good day, but I choose to project more positively. It's a choice, and it's an important choice for a coach or for a leader to be able to do. You can choose how it is that you influence a particular relationship. Now, everybody tends toward being optimistic or pessimistic. That's a reality. We have personality types. Some are more melancholy than others. Nonetheless, it is a truth in relationship and leadership development that if you approach a relationship and are projecting a positive attitude, that there is hope, that there is possibility, maybe with a smile, then study after study demonstrates that the people that you're working with are more open to change, more open to possibility, more open to thinking beyond the narrow framework in which they initially approached whatever that engagement is. So, coming into a relationship, a coaching relationship, with a bit of a positive attitude, even if you don't feel it, you put it on. You smile and you project hope. But that doesn't mean you're always smiling, and it doesn't mean you don't lament when people are lamenting, and it doesn't mean that you aren't sensitive to people when they're going through crisis. This isn't what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about a therapeutic relationship. I'm talking about a coaching, mentoring, and leadership relationship. Because when you approach people with a pessimistic attitude, when you approach people with a gloomy face and an all so serious attitude, then quite literally, study after study shows that the people that you're leading and interacting with will pick up on that, and they will narrow their perspective. They will actually absorb from you, on the one hand, positivity and open thinking, but they'll also absorb from you a critical spirit. They'll absorb from you a hyper narrow point of view and not be open to change, not be open to opportunity, not be open to what it is they have to learn. And it all has to do with the attitude of the leader, with the attitude of the coach. You are contagious, and you can be contagious in a positive way. You choose this. Or you can be contagious in a negative way. You choose that. Make the choice as you approach your coaching relationship to overcome a negative barrier that might be in existence with your coachee when they pick up on your negativity and absorb your critical perspective. Find a way to turn that around and at least start with a smile. It's not that difficult. All right, so we've talked a little bit about the relational aspects of coaching barriers and how we can overcome them. And as I've shared, your optimism is contagious. You build confidence and specificity. You help build trust through small steps. I actually didn't talk about that, but I did talk about how you can choose your narrative, rethink, do disconfirmation of negative attitudes and stereotyping so that you can approach a coachee in a more positive way. Let me talk about, though, about building trust through small steps. So another thing that happens that's a barrier in our coaching relationships is that your coachee, sometimes you as a coach, so, physician heal thyself, but the coachee will be often unable to follow through on major assignments or even simple assignments. And that can break trust. It can break trust with you. And the more often this happens with the coachee becomes discouraged and just begins to give up. Well, I can't do this. As I said, sometimes there's a mismatch. There's reasons why you might want to enter into a different relationship. But don't do that until you've tried to overcome this breach of trust through a failure to follow through by helping your coachee think through smaller steps and to be very clear about what they might be. So, for example, you have an assignment on helping your coachee learn more effective evangelism. And so in this, as with all of our coaching strategies, we have the 3 I's. We have information, implementation, and insight. And you help direct the coachee toward the information. Read this book, watch this particular video, and if you have a chance, you can practice together on how to do things. Watch me, learn from me. So there's information, and then there's implementation. So now, good. So we've practiced together. some simple ways to share the good news of Jesus with others in a conversational way. And your assignment this week is to have a conversation. In fact, have 5 of them that may lead to an evangelistic encounter. And we'll rehearse that together. But then you come back the next week for the insight portion, and it's like, I didn't do it. Well, why didn't you do it? I was afraid. What were you afraid of? Just didn't know what to say. Okay, so this is where you can continue a pattern of, well, just do it. We talked about it, and it's frustrating for both of us. If that continues, it's a breach of trust, and the relationship kind of falls apart. Instead, help bridge those issues by patiently narrowing things down to smaller and smaller bites. Okay, well, I didn't even read the book. Okay, can you imagine yourself reading the book this week? Well, yeah, I can imagine it. Well, what would it look like? What would you have to do in order to read the book? Well, I'd have to skip, a couple of episodes that I'm binging on Netflix. Fair trade, right? Yeah, I guess so. So right now, tell me, what is your plan in order to read the book that you were assigned so that you're ready to talk about this the next time we get together. And then help the coachee articulate their specific plan. Okay, I'm going to give myself 30 minutes a night or an hour a day or whatever at this particular time, and help them be very clear about the particulars. So when they have a plan and you've broken it down into some accountable steps, you can have then, 1, a much better chance of seeing that accomplished, and 2, some clarity about what the expectation was when you meet with them next time if they didn't do it, because that helps you say, well, what did we talk about last week? This, and this. Yes. Why didn't you do it? Well, this and this happened. Yes. Well, there will always be those barriers, right? So overcome those barriers this week. Tell me how you're going to overcome the barriers this week. Keep breaking it down until there's clarity about the simple steps necessary to accomplish the goal. In this particular example I gave, there was reading a book about evangelism, and then there was actually doing the evangelism. So after you practice together, that's what a coaching session does, by the way. You practice these things together, and that gives the coachee an opportunity to have confidence as they move out into the world. But then break it down. Well, why didn't you talk to anybody? Well, I couldn't find anybody to talk to this week. Really? So let's imagine, where are people in your neighborhood, right? Do the imagination experiment, and then continue to work that out. So where are they? Can you see yourself going there this week? At what time? And continue to break it down so that there are smaller and smaller and clearly attainable steps. The outcome on evangelism, or anything that a person does, is always unpredictable. But what can be predictable is the engagement that will help them have an experience in order to learn and grow. So if you have an issue with trust because there's a failure to accomplish goals over and over again, before giving up on the relationship, try to establish trust. You're creating smaller, clearer, and more distinct steps until they're able to achieve whatever that particular goal that you're trying to do together is. Well, we are coming near the end, and I just want to say a quick thing about the resources. Often a barrier is that you don't feel like you have enough resources, or the resources you provided for your coachee just aren't really meshing with the coachee very well, or they simply can't be accessible. These are really simple solutions. We spent a couple of sessions at length talking about, you as a coach, you need to take away from your mentality that you need to know everything to be a coach. You don't. You need to know how to ask some questions and how to guide a conversation so that as your coachee is learning and growing, they're able to reflect, have insight on what they've implemented from information they've acquired. And that information very rarely comes from you. You're guiding them to the resources. So don't worry so much about not knowing enough. None of us know enough. Do, however, pay attention to being prepared for a coaching session to ask the kinds of questions about the material that they've been engaging and the experiences you've asked them to accomplish. But sometimes material is a real mismatch. And so there's a number of ways to accomplish overcoming this. And we've talked about this in the past in coaching training sessions. But if the material is a mismatch, for example, because the coachee is dyslexic and they cannot read very easily, maybe you can find different kinds of material, audible or visual material, or a classroom experience. Whatever the case might be, with some conversation, there is always the opportunity to find something that will be accessible to your coachee. Remember, coach, you have authority. There's a plan you're working from that's been developed as part of the network's Ministerial Education and Guidance Board. It usually has some prescribed reading and experiences based upon an assessment for your coachee. So often your coaching plan will have material ready to be used or recommended. But remember, you have the authority to change that material if it's equivalent or similar and will accomplish the same goal. The most important thing in a material mismatch is finding that which will be most helpful for your coachee. And then finally, sometimes a coachee just can't access material. Usually that's very technical. Sometimes it's financial, really can't afford the books. We have many bivocational pastors who are earning minimum wage and working so that they can also pastor at the same time. They don't have much money. They're supporting a family. And so if that's the case, work with your Ministerial Education and Guidance Board director, and we'll always find a way to make sure that your coachee has what they need in order to accomplish the God-given goals of our coaching strategy. So you're going to think of a million different things that could be barriers. I hope that all of them can be overcome essentially with love and the commitment we have before Jesus to love one another. But practically speaking, as you think of issues that you would like to address, they haven't been addressed in this training session, and I'd encourage you, give our leadership development coordinator, Brenda Mayen, or Immaculate Adeshida, our Ministerial Education Guidance Board director, or even myself a call, and we're more than happy to talk about overcoming barriers. Now, I know you have a lot of questions, and feel free to email me at any time, markadams@undeniableblessing.org, or give me a call. All my information is online. I'm just going to share real quickly. We have right now, I think, 13 people that are moving toward ordination, primarily being developed through the coaching model. And our model is threefold. According to the Free Methodist Church, we want to have outcome-based ordination that has a focus on a heart on fire for Jesus, a head biblically grounded in the Word of God and healthy Wesleyan theology, and hands that are able to fruitfully multiply the kingdom of God and accomplish all the duties of a minister. That's a tall order. However, just recently, I'm just sharing three. There are dozens, and within the next 3 years, probably close to 30 people that will be ordained using the model that we're using here. And you, coach, are the critical piece in this. So just Dave is one of our church planters, just ordained an elder. He does not have a college degree, but he's been well mentored, well trained as a leader in church, sent out as a church planter. And in this process, while he's being coached, what he's needed in order to achieve the outcomes required for ordination was deeper theological understanding. He knows the scripture very well, but deeper theological understanding and some very practical ways to engage missional church planting. Coaching, what you're doing, provided that for David, and he was ordained. Mike is a brilliant mind, a wonderful thinker, a great leader, sacrificing as a pastor, not ordained, for decades, actually, because he has a GED and not advanced education. So through coaching, a few of the things that he needed with a lifelong experience pastoring, there actually wasn't a whole lot more that was necessary in terms of the coaching relationship to bring Mike up to speed for elders' orders. But one of my favorite stories with Mike is, in order to demonstrate he could do advanced education, he was asked to take at least one master's level course, which he did online, a course in Egyptology from Harvard University, and he aced it. So it is possible, and it demonstrated a lot about Mike. But the coaching relationship is what helped him move from a lay leader leading well with the GED to be an ordained elder in the Free Methodist Church, and a fantastic one. George, really languishing in his call as kind of a helpful assistant for the pastor of the church where he was at, felt a call, but in the system of the church, he kind of fell between all the cracks. And it wasn't until he was engaged in an intensive and specific proactive coaching relationship that he was able to, one, get the assessment he needed in order to see what he yet needed to be, to acquire for knowledge and skill as an ordained pastor. But he had almost all the head knowledge necessary, but wasn't quite well versed in some basic pastoral care and evangelism practices. So those are some areas of real focus in coaching. And that helped him go to the next level in order to be ordained. And I could tell story after story after story. You, coach, you are the secret ingredient. When Jesus pours his Holy Spirit into you and you obey and go and make disciples, when Jesus pours his Holy Spirit into you and the things that you've heard from the Lord, you entrust in the presence of reliable people who will be able and qualified to teach others. That's the biblical principle. And you are doing it. You're making it happen. I am extremely proud of all the coaches in our network and look forward to growing a multiplying network of leaders who are able to multiply other leaders. And this is our primary strategy. So what I show here is a slide that kind of talks about the course work that we've gone through together in coach training. And right now, we are talking about overcoming obstacles, but we are going to, on August 10 in Ripon, have a half-day in-person, not virtual, training seminar where we're going to learn coaching tools. We're going to develop tools to help your coachee develop vision and set goals in a leadership capacity. And we're going to look at some of the diagnostic tools we use in the assessment. And you're going to take them. DISC, Enneagram, biblical literacy, and we'll have some fun learning that and learning how to do some interactive coaching. So I encourage you to be a part of that on August 10 at Ripon. It's going to play a dual role for those that have been with us this past year in our coach training. This is the last virtual training session for our coaches. We're going to celebrate your accomplishments, and you will receive a certificate if you've been in the coach training at our meeting in Ripon. And also, it's an invitation to launch new coach training for those that want to begin the process of improving their ability to develop leaders who develop leaders through coaching. So we encourage any who are interested in living out the 2:2, 2 Timothy 2 principle, trusting to reliable people. Those things you've heard from the Lord, so that they can be trusted with. August 10, Ripon, 10 a.m., lunch included. You'll have a blast. Enjoy coaching. You're changing